Is there hope?
All things are possible through him.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are back in the war room, continuing our look at what our sources are calling the Vanguard Defense Doctrine.
That's right.
Last time, we really got into the weeds on identity, on how to exit that legal mask. Today, we're shifting. We're moving to the battlefield of economics, and the mission for this deep dive is pretty clear.
It is. We are here to expose the financial trap.
The financial trap. So if last time was about who you are, getting out from under the person to become the man.
Yeah, the fully actualized man.
Then this time is all about what you owe.
Or rather, what you don't owe. Our sources, the Sophronos Intel, they argue that the entire religious and, frankly, economic system that we live under hinges on just one malicious linguistic swap.
Okay, but a bold way to start. A single swap. Let's unpack that immediately, because that sounds like the core of this entire discussion.
It is the core.
The allegation is that these systems were engineered to swap the very definition of failure or sin from aiming to owing.
Exactly. But before we get into the specifics of that language, it's probably a good idea to just quickly recap where we are in this whole three-layered doctrine.
To set the stage.
Absolutely. Think of this as the final shield, the final gate to your freedom.
Okay, so layer one, which we covered, that was identity.
Right. Defense against the legal fiction, the person. By asserting your reality as a man, you literally take off the mask.
And layer two was consent.
Yeah, defending against the social contract, which is breakable and conditional, by asserting the blood covenant, the unbreakable testament from a king to his heir.
So you take off the mask and you tear up the contract.
You tear up the contract. And that brings us to today, the ultimate defense, layer three, liability.
Right. This is the moment the system, and it could be religious, financial, medical, whatever, it confronts you.
It points a finger and says, you owe us. You owe us for your mistakes, for your shortcomings, for your sins. You are in debt.
And the final answer, really the whole point of this deep dive, is to give you the ultimate statement of freedom in response.
Which is?
My king canceled the debt. I'm just realigning my aim. I owe you nothing.
That's it. That's the moment we burn the ledger.
Okay. So let's jump right into the gears of this deception, the great linguistic swap.
Yeah.
You called it archery versus banking.
That's the simplest way to frame it. And it forces us to look directly at the definition of one of the most loaded words in history, sin.
This is the absolute foundation of the financial trap, isn't it?
It has to be. I mean, if you can control the definition of the flaw, you control the whole mechanism of correction. So when we look at the purified, original, the biblical definition of sin, the key word that comes up is hamartia.
Hamartia. And in its original context, what does that actually mean?
It's a technical term, it's precise, and it comes from archery.
From archery.
Yeah. It just means missing the mark, an archery error. It's about a mistake in your alignment, your focus, your execution. The arrow it went wide of the target.
I really like that imagery. So if you're standing at an archery range and you miss the bullseye, what happens?
Well, what's the consequence? Do you get a fine?
No.
Do you suddenly owe the owner of the archery range a bunch of money?
Of course not. The consequence is purely directional.
Exactly. You must re-aim. That's it. That adjustment, the turning back to the right path, that is the true original meaning of repentance. It's alignment.
So the king doesn't want your payment for a wasted arrow.
No. He wants you to adjust your stance, correct your focus, and hit the next target. It's a process.
That sounds like a journey of growth, of mastery.
It is. But you can't build a multi-trillion-dollar global institution on target practice. It doesn't generate revenue.
So a corrupted definition, a gloss, was applied.
Yeah.
They had to redefine failure.
And they redefined it using the language of banking. They swapped out the archer's term, hamartia,
For a banker's term.
for a banker's term, ophelia.
Okay, let's pause on that. Ophelia. When we say that word, we're talking strictly about what?
We are talking in no uncertain terms about financial debt, owing money. It is a transactional term from a ledger book.
And once you're in that frame, it changes everything.
It puts you immediately in the position of a debtor, an insolvent party who needs a bailout.
So if sin is now a debt, what's the consequence? It's not re-aiming anymore.
The consequence is that you must pay. And this requires a whole new economy, a ritual economy.
Penance, services,
Yes.
tithing.
Indulgences. Any financial contribution to the institution that now claims to be the mediator of this cosmic debt.
So our sources are basically asserting that this single linguistic shift is what turned the entire spiritual journey from sonship, which is target practice with your father.
Into religion, which is just an endless loan repayment plan with a creditor you can never see.
That's it. And the real genius of the trap, the sophistication, is that the language is kept just vague enough.
That you feel perpetually indebted. You can't even name the exact amount you owe, but you know you're behind on payments.
But the core truth, according to the sources, is that the king doesn't want your money. He doesn't want your ritual performance.
He wants your aim. He wants your heart, your alignment. The whole system just needs you to stay in the mental state of a debtor, constantly shuffling papers to pay a balance that is structurally designed never, ever to hit zero.
And that's the point we have to internalize. You can't draw the bow of your own purpose, your will, if you're constantly looking over your shoulder at some fake creditor demanding a payment that in reality has already been made.
Exactly.
So to really prove how strategically damaging this linguistic hack is, the sources say we have to audit the most famous prayer in history.
The Lord's Prayer. We have to go right to the source code of the system.
The line, "Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors." It seems harmless on the surface.
It sounds fair, right? A conditional transaction. I do this, you do that.
But when you look at the specific vocabulary this system encourages us to use, that's where the trap snaps shut.
When that prayer is translated using the word ophyla debts, it fundamentally changes the entire relationship. It establishes a transactional relationship with the king.
You're no longer a son in the household.
No, you're a client at a bank negotiating relief from a creditor.
And what's the psychological impact of that?
Yeah.
Of praying as a debtor every single day?
You're reduced. Your standing is conditional. You are seeking relief instead of standing in assurance.
So the enemy's hack here is, it's brilliant in a very dark way.
It's pure genius. They want you praying as a debtor so you never feel truly free. You never feel fully redeemed. Redemption becomes something you're always working toward, a moving goalpost.
Instead of a starting line you operate from.
Precisely. If you're always chasing the next statement, always waiting for that balance to update, you are never, ever operating from a place of ownership, of belonging.
It keeps the power centered on the institution, the middleman, the creditor's mediator.
Of course.
But the sources, they suggest a radical alternative. What happens if we just switch the words? If we use the language of relationship instead of the language of the bank?
This is the key. When the prayer uses the original concepts, hamartia, meaning missed aim, or even paroptomata, which means trespasses or stumbles,
it creates a totally different dynamic.
It creates a relational realignment. You're acknowledging a momentary deviation, a stumble off the path that your father laid out.
So it requires a correction, a conversation.
Not a monetary penalty.
Wow.
One requires a transfer of funds. The other requires a change in your heart and your behavior. The difference is profound.
So the Vanguard mindset, the mindset of an heir,
doesn't pray like someone who is endlessly renegotiating loan terms. No. They pray as a son who has, for a moment, misaligned his shot and just needs to be brought back into alignment with his father's will.
because their liability was already canceled.
Unilaterally.
It's done. So now they can just focus on their own execution, on their aim.
Wow. That completely shifts the power dynamics. Just that one choice of word, whether you use the language of the bank or the language of the household.
It is a strategic choice for sovereignty. If the debt is already paid, then using the word ophyla in your prayer is basically like inviting a fictitious creditor back into the living room.
You're reopening a closed account. And that is why the sources insist that true freedom starts when you stop acknowledging the terms of the financial trap, even in your most sacred and private moments. That debt is just another mask the enemy wears to control your aim.
And that's the perfect setup for the next critical distinction in these spiritual economics, moving from the debtor to the steward.
Right. It's about who controls the resources and for what purpose. It's the choice between the merchant and the steward.
This comes from Sophronos Module A, right?
Yeah.
The emporos versus the oikonomos.
Exactly. And understanding this difference, it really exposes the entire architecture that controls the flow of spiritual resources in the world.
Let's start with the one who was famously driven out of the temple. The merchant, the emporos. Who is this figure, really?
The emporos is the traveler trader. His entire worldview is based on arbitrage.
Buying low, selling high.
Generating profit from scarcity. And the spiritual trap of the merchant is that he turns everything, including the sacred, into merchandise. This is why Jesus condemned them. He said they turned his father's house into a house of merchandise.
And we're not just talking about selling doves in the courtyard. The sources are getting at something deeper, a spiritual commodity market.
Precisely. These merchants infiltrate the assembly, the church, the temple, and they turn the spiritual power, the anointing, the pneuma, the spirit itself, into a product that you can buy.
That's the technical definition of simony.
It's pure simony. They preach prosperity gospels that tell you if you pay enough or perform enough ritual, God will give you a return on your investment. They're reducing dominion to debt cycles and spiritual assets to tradable commodities.
So the merchant's core message is that your relationship with the king is, at its heart, a business transaction. And the sources show how deep this pathology runs, referencing Revelation 18, where the merchants of Babylon weep over their lost cargo.
And you have to look at what that cargo is. It includes bodies and souls of men. The merchant doesn't just stop at selling T-shirts and faith healing. Their ultimate commodity, once the system is fully corrupted, becomes the inherent value and autonomy of the human being itself.
So if you can monetize a person's identity, their will, their failures,
You have the ultimate sustainable business model. It's the architecture of commodification applied directly to the human soul.
it's terrifying. But there's an alternative. The path to freedom is the steward, the oikonomos.
Right. The oikonomos is the household manager. They are entrusted with the king's resources, the mysteries, the gifts, the spiritual assets, not to sell them,
But to distribute them justly.
to manage them. As 1 Corinthians says, we are managers of the house, the oikos. We're not commodifiers of the spirit.
So what is the radical financial freedom that is granted to the steward?
Here is the absolute core freedom nugget. A steward cannot truly be in personal debt because a steward owns nothing.
Right, the assets belong to the king, the debts belong to the estate.
Exactly. And crucially, the sources assert that the debt, the ophilo, was entirely canceled. Tetelestai, it is finished. That happened specifically so that the stewardship could begin.
Whoa. So that's the pivot. The cancellation of debt wasn't just to make you feel better, it was to change your job description.
It transforms your status. You go from being a struggling debtor, trying to earn your way out of the red, to an authorized manager operating from an overflowing trust fund.
Stewardship replaces the merchant's constant cycle of selling, owning, and owing.
It does. So if you are struggling with a sense of spiritual debt, you are in that moment still wearing the mask of the merchant. We have to decree that we are oikonomoi stewards, not sellers, not debtors in the bazaar. That mental shift gives you the spiritual authority you need to finally burn the ledger.
Okay, now we have to make what might feel like a jarring transition, but it's a necessary one. We've laid out the theological architecture of this financial trap, how debt replaced aim. Now we have to show how that exact spiritual model, this principle of perpetual owing, is implemented in the modern world.
Through systems of physical and psychological dependency. This is where we see the full scope of what the sources call the financial abomination. We're moving from biblical Greek to modern economics.
To show that the mechanism is the same.
The mechanism that generates spiritual debt is the exact same mechanism that generates chronic physical and financial debt. This is the construction of what the sources call the subscription body.
The subscription body. The thesis here from the Sophronos Intel is, well, it's explosive. It says that the current state of public health is not a failure of medicine.
No, it's the successful implementation of an engineered architecture of profitable pathology.
That is a massive accusation.
It's huge. And the evidence they present is purely economic. The system runs on a very cynical, very clear logic. And this was articulated with shocking honesty in a 2018 note from Goldman Sachs.
Right. This was directed at biotech investors.
Yeah.
And they asked a fundamental question.
They asked, is curing patients a sustainable business model?
And what was their conclusion?
The answer was stark. They said that one-time cures are a, and I quote, difficult business model compared to the sustained cash flow that's generated by chronic therapies that require lifelong use.
Cures kill the market.
Maintenance sustains the subscriber base. It's the maintenance model, and it transforms the body from a temple of sovereignty into a subscription revenue source.
Hold on, because that is a powerful claim. That profit is prioritized over wellness. What's the standard counter-argument that you hear? How do proponents of these systems defend this maintenance model?
The standard defense is usually centered on efficacy and scale. They'll argue that modern medicine manages these complex chronic illnesses better and safer than any historical or alternative method. They'll say it ensures millions of people can live functional, though reliant lives.
That management is the best available cure for many of these conditions.
Right. But the source material isn't really debating that. It's focused on the sheer economic incentive against ever allowing the patient to unsubscribe.
Well, that incentive is staggering. I mean, the scale of this debt model is hard to even comprehend.
Oh, it's astronomical. You have tens of millions of people on statins, blood pressure drugs, acid blockers, indefinitely, for life. The global antidepressant market is projected to hit over $26 billion in the next decade.
And the diabetes drug market.
Based on current projections, it's forecast to grow to over $130 billion. These numbers create a financial imperative for these institutions to ensure reliance, not true, independent wellness.
So to build this architecture of profitable pathology, there had to be a foundational coup.
Yes.
And we can't talk about this financial trap without talking about the Flexner Report in 1910.
This was the moment. This was the singularity event where medicine was centralized and industrialized. It was a funded mandate by extremely powerful financial interests.
Specifically Rockefeller and Carnegie.
Rockefeller and Carnegie. Their goal was to consolidate all of medical practice under a single drug-centric model.
But why was that consolidation so necessary? What was the landscape like before 1910?
It was decentralized. You had a dozen competing therapies: homeopathy, botanical medicine, osteopathy, and these modalities were cheap. They were often non-patentable.
And they taught autonomy.
Which was the biggest threat. They
Okay.
posed a direct economic threat to the brand new, emerging pharmaceutical industry.
So the Flexner Report was designed to systematically purge those competitors. How did it actually do that? What was the mechanism?
It wasn't just a gentle recommendation. It was an enforcement mechanism that used money and accreditation as a weapon.
Okay.
The report set an incredibly high and very expensive standard for medical school curriculum and for their physical buildings, standards that only the big university-affiliated institutions that were already doing experimental drug therapies could afford.
So the smaller schools that taught botany or traditional healing,
They just lost their accreditation, their funding dried up, they were starved out of existence.
give us the hard numbers on that. The sources cite some pretty devastating stats.
They were rapid and devastating. You had 22 homeopathic medical schools collapse down to just 2 by 1923. The botanical and eclectic schools, they just vanished.
And the report also had demographic consequences.
Yes, very significant ones. It was used to justify the closure of 5 out of the 7 existing African-American medical schools, which ensured that medical authority remained highly centralized and controlled.
And this leads right to the philosophical intent, which was articulated by Frederick Taylor Gates, who was Rockefeller's advisor.
Right, and Gates was explicit about this. The goal of this new educational philosophy was to create a compliant workforce that was dependent on a centralized system. It was not to create autonomous citizens.
His quote is pretty chilling.
It is. He said the goal was to train people who knew how to execute tasks, not to make them into philosophers or men of learning or science. They wanted workers, not stewards.
And what was the product that they needed these new doctors to sell? This is where the petrochemical marriage comes into play.
Rockefeller Standard Oil was producing massive amounts of petrochemical byproducts. It was industrial waste. And their chemists realized that these byproducts could be synthesized into patentable, trademarked pharmaceuticals.
So the Flexnerian standardization created an exclusive retail market for these new synthetic drugs.
It did. It pushed physicians away from natural remedies and toward these new chemical products. The consolidation of medical education provided the exclusive distribution channel for the industrial waste of the oil cartel.
And this wasn't just a U.S. model.
No, this strategy was globalized. It was locked in through the 1929 cartel agreement between Standard Oil and IG Farben in Germany.
The chemical giant that included Bayer and BASF.
The very same. The entire system was designed from the ground up to ensure that the patient was reliant on patented chemical solutions. It is a direct financial debt model, but for the body.
So once you've created the exclusive dealer network, you have to engineer the patient.
You need to engineer the demand, and that's done through what the sources call the slow kill mechanism embedded in the industrial food supply. This is what creates the endless demand for chronic therapies.
Okay, let's talk about the seed oil deception. This part of the brief it's just shocking. It's waste management disguised as health food.
Crisco, introduced by Procter & Gamble in 1911, it was literally a way to monetize industrial waste, in this case, cottonseed oil.
Which is toxic.
Highly toxic and unstable. So P&G used a process called hydrogenation to stabilize this cheap oil and turn it into a solid fat. Then they launched this massive, decades-long marketing campaign to demonize traditional, stable, nutrient-dense animal fats.
Lard, tallow, butter.
All of it. And to give this a veneer of scientific legitimacy, the source notes that P&G provided a huge sponsorship, $1.7 million, that effectively established the American Heart Association, the AHA, in 1948.
And the AHA then provided the scientific validation for this flawed diet heart hypothesis.
Which falsely blamed saturated fats for heart disease and promoted these new, highly unstable polyunsaturated vegetable oils as heart-healthy alternatives.
Wow.
It was a perfect economic marriage between a waste product and a manufactured necessity.
But the biological consequence is what you call the slow kill. Explain the mechanism. How do these oils actually create chronic illness and dependency?
The issue is a compound called linoleic acid, or LA. Industrial oils contain unnaturally high levels of this acid, and it's extremely unstable. When you consume it, it oxidizes in your body and turns into toxic byproducts, specifically OX-LAMs and a compound called 4-HNE. The sources describe these compounds as molecular shrapnel.
Molecular shrapnel, that's a powerful term. Where does this shrapnel hit?
It has a very specific target, cardiolipin. Cardiolipin is a crucial lipid that's only found in the inner membrane of your mitochondria,
The cell's power plants.
the energy producers.
Mm-hmm.
By damaging cardiolipin, you are effectively crippling the cell's ability to produce energy. This leads to widespread inflammation and mitochondrial dysfunction.
Which is the root of so many chronic illnesses.
It creates the conditions for obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular issues, all the things that require lifelong maintenance drugs. The industrial food system creates the illness, and the flexnerian medical system sells the profitable lifelong solution.
It's a completely closed-loop dependency model. It's designed to put the body into perpetual metabolic debt.
And that biological debt was supercharged in the 1970s with the fructose substitution, when high fructose corn syrup, HFCS, was adopted everywhere.
What makes HFCS so uniquely toxic when it's consumed in these industrial quantities?
Well, unlike glucose, fructose is metabolized almost entirely in the liver, and crucially, it uses the uric acid pathway.
Okay.
This process rapidly depletes the cell's energy currency, ATP. It essentially short-circuits the liver, and that cascade triggers something called de novo lipogenesis.
Which means the creation of new fat.
The creation of new fat directly in the liver. This leads to metabolic syndrome and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It is a direct driver of metabolic collapse.
And this entire process was underpinned by explicit academic fraud. We have the data from the 1960s.
Oh, absolutely. The Sugar Research Foundation literally paid Harvard scientists to publish a literature review that deliberately shifted the blame for heart disease away from shush and onto saturated fat.
And that single act of fraud shaped decades of disastrous dietary guidelines.
It locked the entire population into a high-carb, high-seed oil diet that structurally guaranteed metabolic dysfunction. It was the perfect setup for the maintenance model.
Okay, so it's clear the system engineered the illness.
Yeah.
But the system itself has to be protected.
It has to be.
So we have to talk about systemic enforcement, which relies on what's called regulatory capture. This is the revolving door that locks the whole financial trap in place.
And the foundational mechanism for that capture is the 1992 Prescription Drug User Fee Act, PDUFA. This is essential to understand because it creates the primary conflict of interest.
Break that down for us. If the FDA is getting something like 75% of its review budget from the very companies it's supposed to be reviewing.
How does that affect the decision-making?
Yeah, they're like paying the referee.
That is exactly the analogy the sources use. PDUFA means that the fees from pharmaceutical companies fund roughly 3/4 of the FDA's drug review budget. The agency is financially dependent on the industry it's supposed to regulate.
So it stops being a neutral gatekeeper.
And it becomes a client service organization. Speed and approval become the most important metrics because that's what keeps the revenue stream flowing.
And the practical consequence of this is what everyone calls the revolving door. The people who regulate the industry are very frequently hired by that same industry right after they leave public office.
The source material gives some stunning examples. Scott Gottlieb, a former FDA commissioner, he joins Pfizer's board not long after leaving his post.
For a nice salary.
Around $400,000 a year. Or Billy Towson, the former congressman who actually authored the legislation that banned Medicare from negotiating drug prices.
And then what did he do?
He then accepted a reported $2 million salary to go and lead PHRMA, the most powerful pharma lobby in the country.
We see the same pattern with Robert Califf, another FDA commissioner, who earned millions from pharma and tech consulting in between his two appointments to lead the agency.
This fluid movement of personnel ensures that the economic interests of the maintenance model of the subscription body are protected at the highest regulatory level. It doesn't matter who is technically in charge. The institutional priority is always the sustained cash flow.
Not necessarily the one-time cure.
Not the cure.
And you see the absurdity this creates in the actual published nutritional advice. I mean, look at the 2021 Tufts Food Compass.
Yes. Funded by Gates' interests, this compass used a completely illogical algorithm to rank processed cereals, like Lucky Charms, as healthier than nutrient-dense whole foods like ground beef and eggs.
It's protecting the industrial food supply.
It's ensuring that perpetual metabolic debt continues, and it's providing regulatory cover for the entire architecture.
So if the financial trap uses the body as a revenue source, then it uses the mind as a sedative and the heart as a marketplace.
Exactly. We have to expand this idea of perpetual owing to our psychological and digital dependencies.
And this is where that ancient term you mentioned, pharmakeia, comes back into play. The sources are relating the modern digital environment to this idea of sorcery and deception.
They are. The subscription body model is reinforced by these psychological systems that are designed to erode our vigilance and create new markets based on loneliness. And the digital drug really starts with the infinite scroll.
Which is essentially a form of digital hypnotism.
It is. It leverages the dopamine reward system with this endless, unfulfilling stream of new stimuli. It's meticulously engineered to destroy focus, to diminish the capacity for deep thought, and to sedate your vigilance.
It's the rosary of distraction.
That's what the sources call it. It ensures the mind is too pacified to pursue a difficult, long-term, self-directed aim, your hamartia. You can't aim if you can't focus.
And this digital dependency, it has a direct impact on our drive, on our theleme and our will.
The constant stimulation, especially from things like digital pornography, it creates arousal addiction and dopamine desensitization. It requires escalating novelty, and it diminishes your capacity for real-world intimacy and drive.
So it pacifies the warrior spirit.
It effectively pacifies it, redirecting that primal energy into a sterile loop of consumption and self-isolation.
Which, ironically, feeds the final pillar of this trap, the loneliness market. The system relies on you being alone.
Loneliness is a public health epidemic. The sources cite the Surgeon General's data that social isolation carries the same health risk as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, and this huge reservoir of human pain and disconnection. It's just raw material for new monetization strategies.
These are relationship replacement business models.
Yeah.
Tell us about the parasocial intimacy market.
Platforms like OnlyFans, which generated over $1 billion in revenue, they monetize the illusion of intimacy through a monthly subscription. You pay for a connection, but that connection is synthetic, it's one-sided, and it's fundamentally transactional.
Or the growing market for AI companions.
Right, Replica and LQ. They offer synthetic friendship on a subscription basis, specifically targeting isolated individuals who have lost the capacity or the will to engage in difficult, real-world covenant relationships.
So the core logic is simple.
Loneliness is commodified, and the subscription is the method of extraction. The system ensures you are physically unwell, psychologically sedated, and socially isolated, the perfect customer for perpetual debt, both physical and emotional.
So if the entire system is designed for this chronic, profitable dependency, this ultimate form of perpetual owing, then the exit strategy, what the sources call the guardian detox, it has to be a disciplined act.
An act of reclaiming sovereignty and independence. It requires vigilance and discipline. Or, as we've been saying, focused aim.
But we have to start with a non-negotiable prerequisite.
Critical safety warning. We have to say this clearly. If you are taking prescribed medication, you must consult a qualified clinician before changing anything.
The goal is no unexamined bondage.
Not reckless self-diagnosis.
Okay, let's walk through the 4 protocols for exiting the subscription body and reclaiming your autonomy. Protocol A, breaking the pill loop. Pharmaceutical stewardship.
This is about transforming yourself from an automatic refill subscriber into an informed manager of your own health. You need to conduct an annual audit.
Ask your doctor for every single prescription, does this pill still earn its place?
And crucially, you have to establish exit criteria. You define specific, objective markers or milestones with your doctor for when safe tapering off that medication can begin.
So the stewardship mindset is about using tools for a defined purpose and then putting them down when the job is done.
It restores conscious collaboration. Then, Protocol B, breaking the sugar loop, metabolic sovereignty. This is the direct countermeasure to the industrial food system that engineered your dependency in the first place.
And you can start small. The one swap rule. Replace one sugary drink or one ultra-processed snack per day with a whole food alternative.
An apple, an egg, some ground beef. It's an act of economic sovereignty. You're voting with your dollar against the industrial pathology.
And you can implement the simple eating window, a gentle 12-hour window where you only consume food. For instance, only eating between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m.
This simple constraint helps regulate your metabolic function, and it reduces the sheer volume of glucose and fructose your body has to manage every day. But again, a clinical consultation is key if you have pre-existing conditions.
Okay. Protocol C, breaking the scroll loop. Reclaiming your attention. This is the detox from digital sedation.
It's an act of reclaiming your mental energy so you can pursue your true aim. And the first step is to implement the 24-hour digital Sabbath.
Designate one day a week, or even just one day a month, where social media and doom scrolling are strictly forbidden. You limit your phone to essential voice communication only.
This breaks the digital hypnotism cycle. It reestablishes your capacity for sustained focus. And with that, adopt the night watch rule.
Harden the perimeter of your mind.
Exactly. Remove the phone from the bedroom entirely for the last 30 to 60 minutes before you go to sleep. Use that time for reading, journaling, quiet connection. You have to create the mental space you need to think deeply and pursue your purpose.
And finally, Protocol D, breaking the loneliness loop.
This is about replacing the paid synthetic substitutes with authentic, embodied community and covenant.
You start by recognizing the true cost. Audit your substitutes. Just list the time and money you spend each week on parasocial platforms, on streaming services that are designed for isolation, or on AI companions.
And then flip the financial flow. Set a goal of zero spending on those synthetic substitutes and intentionally reassign those exact funds toward real-world connection. Host a shared meal. Join a mission-oriented local group.
Contribute to community-building activities.
And finally, establish a minimum live contact standard. Aim for at least one meaningful face-to-face or voice-to-voice conversation per day and at least one shared meal or communal mission activity per week.
The system profits when your heart is alone.
So your counter strategy has to be disciplined, covenantal connection.
So we've completed the full exposure of the financial trap. The mission is accomplished.
It is.
The 3 gates of freedom are now standing before you. First, exit the person, reject that legal mask of fiction. Second, tear up the contract, assert your unbreakable blood covenant.
And third, the mission we achieve today, burn the ledger. The theological swap from aim, hamartia, to debt, ophilo, is the blueprint for the modern subscription body. You now see the design, you can now disengage.
So the final command to you, the listener, is this. Burn the ledger. The debt is paid. The Greek term for that cancellation is tetelestai. Pick up your bow, stop paying for what the king already bought, and stop subscribing to a system that profits from your misalignment.
And you can reflect one last time on that word, pharmakeia. The sorcery and deception achieved through substances and mechanisms used to deceive all nations, the ultimate choice is right in front of you. Do you continue paying the subscription fee for chronic dependencies, spiritual, physical, or digital? Do you maintain the merchant's model of owing?
Or do you trust the unilateral, blood-sealed cancellation, the covenant? The price of dependency is the loss of your aim, your sovereignty, and your will.
Freedom is the disciplined act of reclaiming what was already purchased for you. It is refusing to owe, it is picking up the bow, adjusting your stance, and re-aiming toward the mark. Hail victory.